Colossus of Chaos by Nelson Bond. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cindy Morton, Colossus of Chaos by Nelson Bond. Part 1. It was the evil spawn of lifeless space, drifting aimlessly until its sinister birthing place should come. And finding that abode for life, it grew, sucking energy from Terra itself, gathering strength for that time when all should flee before its malign wrath. Out of the darkness it came, out of the grim, bleak furor, incalculable depths of outer space, into the empire of light and warmth and life. It was like nothing known to man. It was round, but not quite round. It was hard, but not altogether hard. It was cold, but not cold with the terrible utter iciness of things which come from beyond. It was in motion, but it did not move of its own volition, for it was quiescent, insensate. It let itself be carried by the vagrant and unpredictable whims of a kinetic universe, confident that in a day, or a century, or 1,000,000 centuries, the fitful fingers of chance would find for it a bourne, a resting place. Out of the night it came, the endless, impenetrable night which spans the void between star and star, out of one cosmos into another, out of oblivion into waking horror. No eye beheld its coming. None saw its faint, thin, cool iridescence. No voice lifted to challenge its arrival on the 6th satellite of the 6th solar planet. It dropped to Earth unwatched, rolled a brief, sluggish way, then rested in a deep, soft, sandy pit. A gray hoarfrost rimed its surface as the warmth of a friendly orb dispelled the frightful chill of space. A pale mist rose from its petroid carapace and trembled into the air like a wan and restless ghost. It had found a home, a lair, a birthing place. With a slow, ecstatic, burrowing motion, it dug itself still deeper into the nourishing sands. It had arrived. It grew. 1. A dangerous place, said the heavy man with ominous deliberation. A most dangerous place. He raised his glass to his nostrils, passed it back and forth appreciatively, and rolled a single drop of the liqueur upon his tongue. A smile creased his full red lips. Excellent, my dear captain, he approved. A most superior brandy. Allow me to congratulate you. Do re mi thol 98, I should judge. Captain Burke, skipper of the IPS space cruiser Gaia, basked in the sunshine of his passengers' approbation. He swirled the liquor in his frosted glass, glanced about the table with a self-satisfied complacency that was almost ludicrous. Then he nodded his head slowly, acknowledging the compliment bestowed upon his judgment in selecting the after-dined liquor. Allow me, he corrected, to congratulate you, sir, on a truly magnificent palate. You have named the exact vine and season. But danger. You spoke of danger. The connoisseur glanced at the young lady across the table and permitted his eyebrows to arch significantly. Perhaps it would be better to abandon the subject, he suggested. After all, I do not wish to cause Miss Graham undue alarm. The girl laughed. She did not seem, noted young Dr. Roswell, occupant of another seat at the captain's table, the least bit perturbed by Grossman's shadowy hint of menace. On the contrary, her already vivid features assumed new color at the scent of danger. Her gray-green eyes brightened. A flush highlighted the natural golden beauty of her cheeks. She bent forward interestedly. Please, Mr. Grossman, don't stop because of me. I want to learn everything I can about Titan. It's going to be my home from now on, you know. I'll learn sooner or later." "Yes," acknowledged the heavy man grudgingly. "I suppose that is true. Your father is commandant of the space patrol post at New Boston, isn't he? Hasn't he warned you of the dangers you face in coming to live with him?" Again, the girl laughed. "Hardly. You see, he doesn't know I'm coming. He'd have conniption fits if he knew I were aboard the Gaia. He's a lamb, really, but terribly old-fashioned. Women belong on Earth, you know, that sort of thing. He thinks I'm safe in a Terra boarding school right now. If he dreamed I were less than an hour off Titan, well, I'm afraid he'd be pale violet with anger." "And," reproved Grossman sternly, "rightly so. Your father is a wise man. Titan is no place for a girl of gentle breeding. It is a vile and treacherous pest hole. It should never have been open to Earth colonists." Rockingham Roswell coughed gently. The young savant was taller than any man present, and but for the conservative cut of his clothing might have looked his true weight. But he carried himself in such a way as to seem more fragile than he really was. His lean, close-shaven cheeks were pale, and his tow-colored hair was meticulously plastered to his scalp. He wore thick-lensed, tortoise-shell glasses, which he removed and polished nervously as he spoke. In that case, Mr. Grossman, it strikes me as a bit odd that you should, have established business headquarters on the satellite." Grossman glanced sharply at the slender man, snapped impatiently. "A businessman cannot always pick and choose his locations, Dr. Roswell. He must follow the path of the Empire as it leads. Since there are Earthmen on Titan, someone must serve them. It is an obligation which cannot be refused." Quite," acknowledged Roswell confusedly. "A job of work to be done. Noble sacrifice. The white man's burden. All that sort of rot. What?" Unaccountably, Grossman flushed. "If you are trying to imply, sir," he fumed, "that I have any ulterior motive in establishing a trade post on Titan—" "Oh, gracious, no. Nothing of the sort. I wouldn't presume to question your, business acumen factor. I'm hardly the type, what?" Roswell smiled a faint, thin, apologetic smile. "I mean, I really don't know much about this sort of thing, if you know what I mean." Captain Burke stared at the younger man impatiently. A spaceman, toughened in the crucible of action, he had little patience with such learned young fops as this passenger. His words were polite, as befitted the skipper of a luxury liner, but his tone was brushed with acid. "If you don't mind, Dr. Roswell, Factor Grossman was about to tell us something about the hazards of Titan. Well, Mr. Grossman?" Grossman took another appreciative sip of his brandy, set down the tulip glass, and steepled his fingers. "Well, the perils of Titan fall into several classes: geographic, physiological, and racial. In the first place, it is a satellite approximately the size of Earth's moon, large enough to sustain life, but small enough to be influenced by the perturbations not only of its massive primary, which lies a scant 760,000 miles away, but also by the attractive forces of the Ring and Saturn's 8 other satellites. Evidence of this is the peculiarity interwoven orbit trajectories of Titan and its nearest sister, Hyperion, which sometimes approach each other perilously close. Were Titan a sphere of pomaceous formation like Luna, it would long since have burst into a million fragments under the impact of these conflicting forces. Fortunately, It is of a basaltic nature and consequently reasonably stable. More immediately hazardous are what might be called the physiological dangers of Titan. These are multifold. To begin with, there is the so-called water of the orb. I've read about that, nodded Captain Burt gravely. Not watered at all, but a deadly corrosive acid, finished the speaker. Yes, happily the seas of Titan do not cover such a share of the planet's surface as do those of Earth. If they did, no life, either flora or fauna, would ever have developed upon the little world. His heavy shoulders shivered. Still, imagine frothing, tide-swept lakes as large as Lake Erie or Victoria Nyanza, splashing endlessly at shores until inch by inch and foot by foot those beaches are eroded, rotted, eaten away by the action of the fluid they contain. These are the oceans of Titan. There are 4 of them, fed by subterranean sources we have not yet discovered. One day, they will have completely devoured the parent planet, and Titan will cease to be. But that day, of course, interposed the girl, is a long way off. Is this the only physiological danger? There is one even more dreadful, the T radiation. T radiation? What is that? Grossman smiled mirthlessly. Were I able to tell you, I should be a greater physicist than any who have so far visited Titan. Dozens of the wisest have come, probed, pondered, analyzed, and left Titan none the wiser for their efforts. Frankly, they do not know. The very name T radiation is an admission of their failure. It is simply an abbreviation for Titan radiation. It is an electromagnetic or radioactive emanation lethal to humans. That is all they know about it. Young Dr. Roswell wiped his spectacles carefully and interrupted. But surely, Factor, these physicists were able to determine the wavelength of the radiation. Did that not tell them? Grossman said bluntly, almost rudely, the radiation lies in the Hertzian range, Dr. Roswell. Does that knowledge help you any? Perhaps now you can tell us why these rays are deadly. Roswell flushed and faltered into silence. The girl glanced curiously at Grossman. Hertzian range factor? Electrical waves ranging between 1 m and 1/10 cm in length, Miss Graham. Their place is between the so-called short waves of radio transmission and the infrared or heat waves. Their existence has been known, theoretically, for at least 200 years, but man has never been able to find a reason, a place, or use for them, nor have they been found to occur freely in nature elsewhere than on Titan. And, asked Captain Burt, you say these waves are deadly to humans? But how then have our colonists managed to win and maintain a foothold? I should have said, admitted Grossman, the waves are deadly to unshielded humans. Lead sheathing protects the wearer from harm. Consequently, men in bulgers are quite safe. And one of the first acts of the Solar Space Patrolmen upon reaching Titan was to project a series of leaden highways or avenues between the cities of the satellite. Upon these, and only upon these, may Earthmen travel unprotected by bulgers. To stray from one of these roadbeds means exposure to the T radiation, and that in turn means death. Rockingham Roswell shuddered delicately. Beastly, he murmured. Deuced unpleasant sort of place, what? But, I say, how about the natives? How did they manage to survive before our countrymen built those jolly old lead roadways? Grossman pursed his lips impatiently at the affected young scholar. They, Dr. Roswell, he said scornfully, are immune to the T radiation. Certainly you are acquainted with the principles of selective breeding. Selective? Oh, yes. Survival of the fittest. All that fiddle-dee-diddle. You mean the present Titanians are the present Titanians simply because they adapted their physiques to the surroundings? Why, rather. That's clear enough. Still, if they can stand the radiation, I don't see why other humans... Other humans? Grossman laughed curtly. My dear doctor, it is obvious you have never seen a Titanian. Human indeed. Why, it is the dissimilarity between the Titanians and ourselves which led me to name racial divergence as among the hazards of life on Titan. The creatures who rule Titan look less like humans than like those monsters deranged and alcoholic patients see in their dreams. For some reason, possibly because of this mysterious T radiation, the denizens of the world have never bred true. Consequently, there is no way of foretelling what the child of any two parents may resemble, though one almost certain guess is that it will resemble neither parent. Bilateral symmetry is about the only constant human attribute to be found amongst the Titanians. That and a more or less rudimentary intelligence, an instinct which is more akin to animal cunning than to intellect. Some Titanians walk erect on their hind legs. Some crawl on all fours or squirm on their bellies. Some resemble the humanoid races of our planet or Mars or Venus. Others look like obscene jungle beasts, ghouls, fabulous monsters. I have seen Titanians whose leprous flesh-covered bones have no counterpart in the human skeleton. Others with no faces at all, as we know the meaning of the word. Others who grope blindly along on tactical tentacles, seeing with foot-long tongues, hearing through their fingertips. Some there are who look like gigantic crimson ants. Others inch their way along the streets like hideous mangled slugs. While yet again, astonishingly, you may chance upon a Titanian not only similar in appearance to Earthmen, but as clever and quick in thought as any terrestrial. Grossman paused, nodding significantly. These, he said, are the most dangerous of all. And, breathed Lynn Graham, the nature of this danger, Mr. Grossman? Attack, perhaps? Attack! The trading post factor laughed brusquely, harshly, a mild word for it. Extermination. The Titanians hate interlopers on their world, particularly Earthmen, with a smoldering, implacable hatred inconceivable to a civilized mind. Had they their will, they would hunt down every Earthman and slaughter him with the most horrible tortures their warped and twisted minds can devise. Your father, Miss Graham, Grossman bent forward across the table to lend emphasis to his warning, maintains a post on Titan by sufferance only, because the natives have not the strength nor the weapons with which to rebel. But if ever the day dawns when they find such strength or weapons, Grossman drew a deep breath and shook his head. Then, Lord help all like us who dwell on Titan. 2. It had arrived. It had found a birthing place. It grew. There in the lone, lorn silence, in the thawing warmth of the nourishing sands, it spawned according to its nature. It made no sound, save that of a thin, dry grating as its shell-like covering stirred against the sides of the pit. But a change had come upon its carapace. Its one-time stony surface now was mottled with yolky cloud. Its one-time opaque walls were now translucent with a jelly-like shimmering, and from within the egg came the bruit of liquid movement, slow, groping, movement of life that would be free. Amorphous hands scraped and slithered at softening, yielding walls. A single flake chipped and fell away from the gigantic shell. Another followed it, another and another. A native of the planet, random roaming, chanced upon the pit. His nostrils quivered with the scent of food. With greedy stealth he moved upon his prey. And then the native witnessed the phenomenon. Wide-eyed with wonder, he beheld the monstrous sight, the ultimate emergence of the thing. In his dull, brute-like brain there dawned a dreadful fear. A fear and a great hope. On trembling limbs he fell back from the pit, all thoughts of food forgotten, turned and scampered to the city whence he had come. Meanwhile, the sprawling, raw, and new-fledged thing lay gasping in the sunlight, sucking strength from the depths of the nourishing soil. It was born. It grew. 3. A strange silence followed the factor's final words, a silence during which Lynn Graham's troubled gaze swept the table, searching reassurance, finding none in the eyes of her dinner companions. A silence during which Dr. Rockingham Roswell fidgeted uneasily, removed his glasses, breathed upon them, polished them, and replaced them for the 100th time. It was Captain Burke who finally broke the spell. He cleared his throat and rose. "Well, I must be getting along to the bridge. We'll be at New Boston Spaceport in a matter of minutes now. I suggest that you go to your staterooms, see that your luggage is in order, and prepare to disembark." Dr. Roswell said hesitantly, Captain, just a moment. How soon does the Gaia return to Earth?" "Return to Earth, but..." Captain Burke turned a blank, uncomprehending stare upon his questioner. "But you have not yet set foot on Titan." Dr. Roswell shuffled uncomfortably. I quite realize that, Captain, but I have been reconsidering. In view of Mr. Grossman's revelations, I am not altogether certain it would be wise to pursue my investigations." The space skipper's broad, flat features contracted into a grimace of disdain. Despite his company's instructions to maintain at all times a respectful mien toward passengers, he permitted contempt to echo in his voice. "You don't mean to say you are afraid, Dr. Roswell?" The young man's cheeks flushed. He said, "I should not put it quite that way, sir. However, I prefer not to expose myself to needless risks. The work I had intended to do on Titan is not sufficiently important to warrant." Grossman chuckled. The girl, Lynn Graham, looked at the embarrassed pedant almost pityingly. Captain Burke said, "I am afraid, Dr. Roswell, it will not be possible to return to Earth immediately. The Gaia is not returning to Earth." "Not returning?" "No. We are going on to Uranus to leave a cargo of food and medical supplies there. We will, however, stop back at Titan in 3 solar constant weeks. If," the skipper's voice was openly ironic, "if you can endure the rigors of the satellite for that length of time, we will be glad to pick you up on our return trip." I suppose it would not be possible for me to ride with you to Uranus?" "I'm sorry," said Burke decidedly. "The Uranus post is a military zone forbidden to civilian tourists. I cannot take you there." "Then, in that case," shrugged Roswell, "I must stay." "But you will stop for me." "I'll stop for you. Meanwhile, you had better make arrangements to stay somewhere where you will be quite safe." Captain Burke's patience was quite exhausted. "Miss Graham can perhaps prevail upon her father to allow you to remain at the Space Patrol base?" The young doctor turned to the girl eagerly. "Can you, Miss Graham? I would be most grateful." Lynn Graham nodded. her icy politeness more devastating than forthright scorn. "Yes, Dr. Roswell, I am reasonably sure you can make such arrangements. I will ask Daddy as soon as we land. And now, gentlemen, if you will excuse me." She rose and left the dining hall. Grossman, still chuckling, followed her example. He stopped at the doorway. "Sorry I upset you, Roswell, but cheer up. 3 weeks will pass swiftly. You'll be all right on Titan if you keep your eye peeled and carry your Hamas Holst at all times." But his reassurance proved to be just the opposite, for the savant's lower jaw dropped. He quavered, "Hammerholz? Gracious, you mean I should carry a ray pistol? Oh, mercy, I couldn't think of doing such a thing." And with a little bleat of dismay, he turned and ran toward his stateroom. The 2 men in the dining hall watched him disappear. Then Grossman laughed aloud and Captain Burke snorted. "The younger generation. If that's the kind of men Earth is breeding nowadays, Lord help us all." Dr. Rockingham Roswell pattered down the long metal corridors of the Gaia to his A-deck suite. He fumbled nearsightedly at the vibro lock and stumbled into his compartment. But once inside, the door securely bolted behind him, a change came over him. A change which would have astonished those who had a few moments before been amused at his timidity. He removed his spectacles, casing them and thrusting them into an inside pocket. He then removed his coat. Oddly enough, rid of that closely tailored garment, his shoulders looked considerably broader, his chest inches deeper. He drew a deep breath, much the same sort of breath as a sponge diver draws when he emerges from the hampering depths of the sea to the more accustomed world above, and called a name. "Bud?" A figure appeared from the plussy wallows of a divan, waved at the young professor companionably. "Hi, Rocky. Beginning to wonder when you was coming back. We're halfway to the cradle. What's the good word?" "The good word," grinned his informant, "is that I've paved the way. Miss Graham is going to ask your father to let us stay at the patrol base." "Huh?" Mulligan looked baffled. "What's good about that? We could have stayed at the patrol base anyway. All you had to do was tell Colonel Graham who you were." His superior officer groaned in mock despair. "Sometimes I wonder if that cranium of yours is good for anything but a hair garden. Don't you see, Bud, that the whole scheme depends on being invited to become guests at the patrol base? Of course, we could present our credentials, walk directly from the Gaia to headquarters, but it would be a cold tip-off to Grossman that we are SID men. As it is, he hasn't got the faintest idea that Dr. Rockingham Roswell and his valet are members of the Solar Investigation Department. He thinks I'm a very badly rattled pedagogue, and you're a mealy-mouthed nonentity. And that is exactly what we want him to believe, until we get the goods on him." "Then he is our man?" "I'm practically certain of it now. He's as nervous as a cat. Flared up the moment I questioned his reasons for living on Titan. As factor of the new Boston trading post, he is in an ideal situation to stir up trouble amongst the Titanians. That's precisely what he has been doing. We don't know exactly why, yet. But it's quite clear that for some reason of his own, he wants all Earthmen save himself to leave Titan." "Gold, maybe?" suggested Bud. "Oil? Eklystron?" "No, I don't think so. The mineralogists would have detected the presence of any of those when they surveyed Titan. His reason is something deeper than that. Say, wait a minute. I wonder if it possibly..." "Yeah?" "No, I'm crazy. It couldn't be that. I happened to think of that T radiation, but I don't believe even Grossman's enough of a scientist to have discovered what it is or how it can be used, if at all. Well, anyhow, we're in at the base, and Grossman doesn't suspect us. That's part of the job. So, the next move? We circulate. We move around and ask questions and snoop and pry and investigate." Mulligan grinned. "And the good old Rocky Russell tradition, eh?" "Who?" Rocky Russell, I said. Don't tell me you forgot your real name, chum. Rocky Russell reached into an inside pocket, brought forth a pair of thick-lensed spectacles, hooked them over his ears, his voice lifted to a high, gentle, hesitant whine. Oh, mercy me, he simpered, forgotten my, real name? But of course not. I am Dr. Rockingham Roswell, and you are my valet, Ambrose. Bud groaned. God, all the names in creation, and I've got to be called Ambrose. So, you're a doctor? Asked Colonel Graham. That's fine. We can use another doctor on this post. Glad to have you stay with us, Dr. Roswell. Several hours had passed since the Gaia's landing on Titan. In that time, much had happened. Dr. Roswell and his man had made their adieu to a scornful Captain Burke and a highly amused Factor Grossman, removed their baggage from the cruiser, and accompanied Lynn Graham to the SSP base a few miles outside the Titanian city of New Boston. There they had witnessed the surprise meeting of the Commandant and his daughter. Lynn Graham had rightly guessed her father's reaction upon seeing her. She had erred only in one minor detail. She had expected him to turn pale violet with anger. The color he actually achieved was somewhere in the apocalyptic spectrum between dull scarlet and turkey red. His outraged bellows, replete with invocations to the deities of a dozen worlds and highly censorable, were audible for a good half-mile. But eventually, when Lynn had pointed out that 1, she could not return to the Gaia, 2, she didn't want to return to the Gaia, and 3, that she had no intention of returning to the Gaia even if she could, he calmed down a trifle. And in his brusque kiss of greeting was an affection hardly in keeping with the violence of his protestations. It was then that Lynn introduced Dr. Roswell and his valet, explaining their desire to stay at the base. Confused and bewildered, the Commandant had agreed, and now the quartet were gathered in the Colonel's private quarters. The Colonel, in his own crisp way, was trying to be friendly. Doctor, he repeated, that's good. We need the services of a good doctor round here. Rocky smiled feebly. I am afraid you don't understand, sir. I'm not an MD, you know. I'm an, DM. DM, repeated Graham wonderingly. What's that? A doctor, explained Rocky, of mythology. It's an archaeological degree rather than a medical one. I'm what, might be called a research student. I gather folk tales and ancient legends, study them, analyze them, and attempt to determine their underlying meanings. He beamed happily from behind his thick-lensed glasses. A most fascinating hobby, he said. Oh, goodness, yes, most fascinating. Colonel Graham stared at him incredulously. Legends. Folktales? But why on earth? Red of face, he sputtered into silence. Lynn tried to bridge the awkward moment. What Daddy means, Dr. Roswell, is, why do you hunt down these ancient fables? Does your work have any practical value? Rocky's eyebrows arched, as if the query caused him a physical pain. Practical value? My dear young lady, of course not. It is purely a labor of love. Knowledge for the sake of pure knowledge. Scientia gratia scientarium. You know, that sort of thing. Of course, he shrugged. Once in a while, the research of my learned colleagues does contribute a share to the understanding of man's more mundane pursuits, but such occasions are, I hasten to assure you, quite incidental. Colonel Graham had recovered his composure. Mythology, eh? Well, what sort of legends interest you, Doctor? Fairy tales? Ghost stories? Well, no, said Rocky pedantically. The tales of greatest interest are those of fabulous monsters, incredible beings endowed with fantastic powers or attributes, such as may be found in the mythologies of any race or clan. Not only on Earth, but on all the planets have we heard such stories. It's our delight to track down these tales and unearth the germ of underlying truth which created them." "You mean," queried the girl, "that behind each folktale lies a true cause or event or creature?" "Exactly. For instance, well, let me see. You are familiar with the earthly legend of the phoenix, aren't you? The bird which was supposed to have had a lifespan of 1,000 years, at the end of which time it threw itself into a blazing pyre from the ashes of which it was reborn." "That," nodded Dr. Rocky, "is the legend. Quoted as you have told it, it made no sense to Earthmen for thousands of years, until, in fact, the year 1987 AD, when the first Martian expedition visited the desert planet. The members of this expedition were amazed to discover a rara avis upon Mars, impervious to extremes of both heat and cold, a bird with an astonishing lifespan in excess of 1,000 earthly years. In short, the archetype of the fabled phoenix." Colonel Graham looked interested in spite of himself. "By God, that's right. The Tulaluru bird. Doesn't mind heat or cold, either one. Nests in ice or red-hot coals. That's rather interesting, Doctor. Any more such examples?" "Scores. There's the fabled unicorn, a one-horned gazelle-like animal, certainly not indigenous to Terra, yet it found its place in the unnatural natural history of not one, but a dozen races. Whence originated this record of a single-horned creature we could not guess, until we discovered such a beast on Venus. The fabulous salamander turned out to be a common asbestos-like lizard of Mercury. Aqueous Venus solved for us the problems of the mermaid, the sea serpent, and the undine. On mighty Jupiter, mythologists encountered the fire-breathing saurian, which gave rise to the dragon myth." "But, Dr. Roswell," gasped the girl, "what does this mean? That once upon a time, countless centuries ago, beasts of this sort roamed the earth, or—" Rocky shook his head soberly. "We do not know, Miss Graham. There are a number of equally valid possibilities. One is that which you have mentioned, that Earth was once host to all the types of animal life now to be found on its sister planets. Another is that eons ago, Earthmen, or the intellectual rulers of one of the other planets, knew the secret of space travel. The factual records of places visited, strange sights seen, would in the musty passage of time become mythology." "Still another possibility?" "Yes." "Well, it is a theory recently advanced by an erudite scholar, but it has elements of fantasy which make it almost incredible. You are familiar with the theories of Savante Arianus?" Lynn frowned. "I remember the name faintly. Didn't he claim life traveled through the ether?" "Yes. He put forward the concept that the life germ is universally diffused, constantly emitted from all habitable worlds, in the form of spores which traverse space for years or ages, the majority being ultimately destroyed by the flame of some blazing star, but some few finding a resting place on bodies which have reached the habitable stage. My colleague has carried this theory a step forward, suggesting it is not only the fundamental life germ which thus travels, but also individual and distinctive life forms. He has suggested that from each and every world in every galaxy, occasionally there set forth into the void the spores or eggs of every highly developed life form. Most of these never reach their destinations. Some do, and when these do, unwilling worlds play host to beasts of nightmare mien." 4. A babble from the street lifted Humboldt Grossman's eyes from shrewd perusal of his ledgers. He frowned, rose to investigate the tumult, then stood stock still in his tracks, startled as the door of his private chamber burst open. A stunted troll with 4 gnarled dangling arms, a native Titanian, served as spokesman for the excited group. "A marvel, master," he jabbered. "Behold, a marvel! It was found by one of us in the sand pits north of the city, captured and brought to you immediately. See, O master, its height, its bulk, its strength." He stood aside, and into the room a score of tugging natives hauled a bound and helpless creature. Bound and helpless creature. Bound, yes, with yards upon yards of tightly laced metal cord, which even now stretched taut over bulging sinews. Helpless, perhaps. It stood quietly, struggling not, but in its very quiescence, Factor Grossman found a swift, disturbing menace. It was still as floodwaters are still, ere angered. They burst with fury, the puny dams constraining them. It was motionless, as powerful machines are motionless before, spurred to deed, they ravage all before them. A creature it was, but such a creature. Humanoid in form, male, but dull of eye as a brain-fogged idiot. It was 7 feet tall and half as broad of shoulder, heavy of thigh and iron-strong of bicep, a Hercules, an Atlas of a man. Grossman stared at it strangely. Then he turned to his native visitors. "It is a marvel, yes, a great man. But what has it to do with me?" The spokesman cringed forward hopefully. "It has power, O master. You promised us vengeance and freedom when we found you one with strength to fight our cause." Grossman's thick face mottled with disdain. "Fool," he spat. "Do you call this creature power enough to wage a war? One half-wit giant against a well-armed garrison of humans? Take it away. This is not the power I asked for." The Titanian inched another step forward. "Wait, O master," he advised. "Wait and see what we have seen. For not yet do you understand. He is still growing." Grossman stared, his tiny pig-like eyes bewildered. "Growing? This giant? Growing?" "Yes, master. He is as yet a babe. This monster is less than 2 hours old." 5. The gunner said, "This year, now 4-headed animule just sort of wriggled its fur like a presto. All of a sudden, it ain't no beast at all, but a bird. Yes, sirree, just as sure as I'm telling the gospel truth, it turned smack into a purple bird with 6 green wings and a lavender tail." He stopped and aimed an accurate stream of Venusian meckle juice at a hapless insect. The insect floundered helplessly. So did Rocky Russell, inwardly, with his desire to laugh out loud. But he restrained himself, nodding his head sagely as he jotted a transcript of the old trooper's narrative in his little black notebook. At his side, Lynn Graham protested, "Oh, Gunner, but really, I mean, you must be mistaken. Animals simply don't turn into birds and fly away." "This'n did," swore Gunner solemnly. "Hope to drop dead in cross my heart. And that ain't all the curious sights I seen in my life, neither. If the professor would like to hear another little story." "I'm sure," said Rocky primly, "it would be most interesting, but I hate to trouble you." "No trouble, Professor, no trouble at all. Course, my throat is getting a mite dry like from talking so much. I might could use a sip of water or maybe a drab of liquor to sort of loosen my tongue." Rocky dug deep, and a coin passed between him and his informant. "Please allow me, Gunner, and many thanks. We'll have another little chat soon. I'm afraid I must be running along now, though." Followed by his 2 companions, he climbed from the pillbox embrasure in which he had been interviewing the not-too-reliable old patrolman. 2 days had passed since Dr. Roswell and his aide had taken up residence in the base. In that time, Rocky had wandered much, talked much, and learned much. Slowly, he was beginning to gather that accumulation of facts which, he hoped and believed, would ultimately bring the weight of the law to bear on Factor Humboldt Grossman. Exactly what Grossman's racket was, he still didn't know, but from various and sundry sources, he had heard tales of the fat man's greed and cunning, his autocratic domination over a number of the lower-class Titanians. In his own small way, and to those rebels he had gathered about him, Humboldt Grossman was Emperor of New Boston. It remained to be proven whether or not he could extend his control to embrace the whole of the satellite. Emerging from the sunken gunnery pit, the trio found themselves upon one of the metal highways which crisscrossed the little world. To their left lay the squat, grim rows of structures which comprised Fort Beausejour, the Solar Space Patrol Base on Titan, barracks, administration and ordnance headquarters, mess halls, dumps, and depots mingled with gray heterogeneity behind a strong defense in depth calculated to withstand months of siege or any known form of military attack. To their right, several miles distant, at the far end of the highway, lay the city of New Boston. It was a strange city, a curious commingling of ancient and modern, savage and cultured, alien and civilized. It boasted 2 tremendous skyscrapers of ultra-modern design constructed by Earth colonists, but about and around these, clustered like mud daubers' nests, clung rows upon rows, thousands upon countless thousands of tiny, dingy, one-story hovels, the dwellings of the natives. It was into this city Rocky Russell's investigations now led him. He glanced at his wrist chronometer. Bless my soul! Very nearly time for my appointment with Factor Grossman. You are sure we can use a roller, Miss Graham? Positive, answered the girl cheerfully. I asked Daddy yesterday. You wait here, I'll get it and come back. She moved away, giving the 2 SID men their first moment of privacy in hours. Bud Mulligan sighed and fumbled for a cigarette. So, we're really going to go see Grossman at last? Good. How'd he sound when you audioed him for an interview? Friendly enough, answered Rocky. He said he was very busy, but he'd be glad to give me a few minutes. Did he know what you wanted? Rocky grinned a slow, lopsided grin. Everybody on Titan knows by now, he drawled, that there's a myth-chasing crackpot roaming loose. I'm public joke number 1, which suits me just fine. Yeah, snorted Bud disgustedly, but when this job's done, I'm going to backtrack and do a little plain and fancy nose punching. Like that old space rat we talked to a few minutes ago. Did you ever hear such lying in your life? A bird with purple wings and... Cheer up, chuckled Rocky. Gunner thought he was giving me the runaround, and for the generally unimaginative old codger, he didn't do such a bad job of yarn spinning. He'd be surprised to learn, though, that his wild story is not half so fantastic as some of the honest tales I've heard since I began this masquerade. Bud nodded grudgingly. That's true enough, and boy, I've really got to hand it to you. You talk that doctoral mythology patter like you really was one. Sometimes you sound like you really believed in it yourself. And the funny part is, said Rocky, I almost do. As for talking the patter, well, no wonder. I studied comparative mythologies for 3 solid months under the best experts in the field before I took this job. But I know more about hammerads and demigods and winged horses than old man Bullfinch himself. Well, he nodded significantly, and his voice lifted to the high-pitched tones of Dr. Rockingham Roswell. Here comes Lynn. Off we go. Bud shot a swift, appraising glance at him. Oh ho! So it's Lynn now, eh? Fortunately, Rocky Russell did not have time to concoct an alibi for that slip of the tongue. Because the roller was drawing up beside them, Lynn was motioning them in, and in a few minutes they were on their way to New Boston. "You understand," said Factor Grossman, "I have never seen this creature myself, Dr. Roswell. I am merely repeating the description given me by some of my friends." Rocky nodded, busily jotting in his ubiquitous black notebook the facts just told him by the fat man. "A furry animal," he repeated, "with the nether parts of a horse and the torso of a human, 2 curly black horns, cloven hooves, is occasionally glimpsed in damp woodland dells. Excellent." He looked up, smiling. "Very interesting, sir. You have perhaps already noted the similarity between this, thing and the centaur of Greek mythology? Amazing, isn't it, that we should find the same, legendary monsters on 2 worlds separated by so many millions of miles? Well, we must organize an expedition to search for this creature. Now, have you any other fables to add to my little collection?" He poised his pencil expectantly, his eyes vaguely eager and excited. "Well, let me see." Grossman stroked a sleek, fleshy jaw. "I heard one the other day about—" "Yes? What is it, Gruschel?" A Titanian had pressed open the door of the factor's private office. He glanced at the guests nervously. "If you please, sir, the thing that grows, it has broken its—" "That will do!" Grossman's voice crackled like the snap of a bulldozer's whip. He rose hastily, bowed apology to his visitors. "If you will excuse me a moment." He strode to the door, propelled his underling out of sight and hearing. The 3 guests stared after him in astonishment. "Well," exclaimed Lynn Graham, "whatever came over him so quickly? Why, he turned positively pale." "You're telling me," grunted Bud. "He looked like he'd seen his grandmother's ghost. Or his own. What did that guy say? Thing that grows? What would that be? And what would it break?" "Shh," warned Rocky. "He's coming back." "Ah, there, Factor. Everything all right?" Grossman had been gone but a few seconds, but in that time a change had come over him. His eyes were dark with, Rocky could not tell just what, excitement or fear. A thin film of perspiration overspread his cheeks, his forehead, his upper lip. He tried to put reassurance into his voice, but the effort didn't quite gel. "Quite all right, Doctor. A little trouble with a small horticultural experiment we are conducting, but I'm afraid I must ask you to leave now. I have work to do." Rocky said, "If I, can be of any help." "No, thank you very much. This is work of experimental nature. Company business, you know." The factor bustled them to the door. "We will meet again. Good afternoon." And almost before they had stammered their confused farewells, he had waved to them and lumbered off. "Well," said Lynn, "I must say that's the quickest brush off I ever got, if not the smoothest." "Horticultural experiment," mused Rocky. It's possible, of course, but I wonder, Bud, Ambrose?" "Yeah," said Ambrose. "I think I'll stay here in New Boston for a few more hours. I'd like to, study the native quarters. Perhaps you would be kind enough to escort Miss Graham back to the fort?" "Certainly," nodded Bud. "A pleasure, but—" Lynn Graham had been staring from one to the other of the 2 men querulously. Now she declared herself. "Oh, no," she said flatly. "You don't get rid of me so easily as all that. Dr. Roswell, just what's going on here?" Rocky fumbled for his glasses. Going on, Miss Graham? I don't understand." "Neither do I. which is just why I'm asking. First, Grossman goes into a mild panic. Now you two are acting like the masked strangers in Act 2, not to mention the fact, the girl pointed out shrewdly, that for a few minutes you quite forgot to talk like a college professor and addressed your alleged valet as Bud. Rocky did remove his glasses, but this time he did not breathe on them, wipe them, and replace them, as was the habit of Dr. Roswell. Instead, he shoved them out of sight and grinned at the girl. When he spoke, it was with his natural voice. "All right, Miss Lynn," he said, "you win. I pulled a boner. Now, I might as well come clean. I am not Dr. Rockingham Roswell at all. My name is Russell, Rocky Russell, and I'm here on Titan to..." But not at that moment did he tell Lynn Graham who he was and his purpose on the satellite, for suddenly he paused in mid-sentence, his jaw dropping open and his eyes widening to match. "Lord!" he gasped. Look at that!" The others, too, had turned to determine the origin of the rumbling sound. Now they saw it. A tremendous motor roller trundling down the main thoroughfare of New Boston, a heavy roller bearing a ponderous burden, a single gigantic item. The appearance and purpose of this item was unmistakable, but its size? "Manacles?" croaked Bud. But who ever heard of manacles that size? That thing is 20 feet in circumference. 6. Humboldt Grossman entered the cavern cautiously. It was dark in there, but not altogether dark. The ever-present luminescence of the chamber walls lent an eerie glow by which could be seen the giant figure huddled at the far end. There had been bonds upon the wrists and ankles of this figure, but now the frayed ends of snapped hawsers dangled loosely as the creature pawed fretfully at adamant walls and ceiling. At sight of the monster, Grossman faltered, stunned. To the Titanian behind him, he choked hoarsely. He still grows?" "Yes, master. Already he must crouch to avoid being crushed by the cavern's roof. Each hour he grows faster. In a day, half a day, perhaps less, he will die in here if we do not let him out." Grossman smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Have no fear. Before that time, he will be outside, under my control." He stepped forward into the cave. The creature's eyes turned questioningly toward this tiny mote of life which dared approach him thus, stretched forth a hand to crush the annoying insect, but from a curiously shapen tube in the insect's claw leapt a lancet of flame, a gout of red agony that scorched and blistered his palm. The giant howled and pulled his hand away. Grossman smiled. "Good. Who holds an adversary in fear of pain possesses a slave. Now, if only the creature were telepathic." "You," he thought, his thought directed and intensified by the menovisal unit in his helmet. "Have you intelligence? Can you understand me?" The giant's answer came back sluggishly. "I can understand." "That is well. Then listen to me and mark well my words. I am master here. Do you acknowledge that?" The creature stirred restlessly. "Master? I accept no master. I am master of my own will." Grossman pressed the grip of his hammerholz. A flash of livid lightning seared the subterranean chamber. Grossman challenged. "You defy the master of the fire that bites?" The giant cringed against the farthest wall. "Nay," he conceded, "you are master. I am your servant." "It is well you understand, for there is work to be done. When it is accomplished, then you will be freed. Hear now, huge one, what is expected of you." 7. "Manacles?" repeated Rocky Russell. "Manacles 20 feet in circumference? But that's impossible. Handcuffs for a normal 6-foot man measure about 6 inches in circumference. 20-foot manacles would be used on someone 240 feet tall. Always assuming, of course, Lynn pointed out, that these gyves are to be used on a man, which isn't very likely. Much more possible that they were constructed for some beast, some tremendous animal. True, admitted Rocky, but even so, imagine the size of that animal. Well, that settles it. Bud, I want you to take Miss Graham back to the fort immediately. And you? I'm going to follow that roller. But there may be danger. There undoubtedly is danger, replied Rocky grimly. Directed at the patrol, perhaps the whole of Titan. Those manacles are somehow associated with Grossman's secret. I've got to learn how. You can help best by racing to Bézageur and warning Colonel Graham to be on guard against any eventuality. Keep your portable vocoder turned to our private wavelength. If and when I learn anything important, I'll send it on to you. OQ? Bud shrugged helplessly. You're the boss, but I'd rather stay here with you and get going. Oh, when you reach the base, take the lid off. Tell Colonel Graham who we are. And if it's not too much trouble, interrupted Lynn Graham, would you mind telling me now? Rocky grinned at her for the last time, using Dr. Waswall's high whine. Oh, mercy, Miss Graham, you mustn't be impatient. Ambrose will tell you as you ride. Ambrose, fumed Bud. Ambrose be damned. But he was talking to empty space. Rocky had already disappeared down the avenue after the gyve-laden roller. Fortunately, the roller, groaning under its ponderous burden, was not moving very fast. Rocky, though on foot, was able to keep it within sight without too obviously appearing to be following it. In the character of Dr. Rockingham Roswell, already known and amusing to the Titanians, he dawdled through the city 500 yards or so in the wake of the burdened vehicle. Through business streets he followed it, where eyes turned to follow its passage and furtive Titanians whispered to each other behind concealing palms, and, as the squalid little shops thinned out into the suburban residential districts, finally quite out of the city proper. Out here it was practically impossible to follow the truck without being noticed. Once the city's artificial foliage was left behind, the landscape of Titan's countryside stretched stark and severe so far as the eye could see, its drab, sandy monotony broken only by an occasional dune, its dull sameness embellished only by the silvery span of roadbed upon which humans must travel to live on Titan. By dropping far behind the roller, Rocky was able to keep it in sight for a little while longer, but then his efforts came suddenly to naught as the driver of the truck, a Titanian, swerved completely off the lead highway and began rolling across the barren desert toward a hummock outlined on the horizon some miles distant. Lacking a bulger, Rocky was stopped cold. No way to follow now. But he waited and watched a while longer to assure himself that the swollen rise of ground was the roller's destination, then strolled back into New Boston. Here he sought the privacy of a fresher and called Bud on the vocoder. Mulligan answered immediately. Yeah, Rocky, everything all right? Everything's all wrong. Confounded roller left the highway and plowed across the gray and nasty. Having no desire to be cooked into frizzled beef, I gave up the chase. That's tough, Chief. What do we do now? I, said Rocky, stay right here. You load a couple bulgers in a roller and come charging back here as fast as you can. I still want to find out what Grossman's hiding in those hills that needs to be tied up with 20-foot bands of forged steel. OQ, said Bud. Sit tight. I'll pick you up in 3 shakes. Make it 2. 1, chuckled Bud. I'm practically on my way now. He was as good as his word. Rocky'd only finished 1 cigarette when a blue SSP roller came tearing up the highway from Fort Bézageur. Bud jumped out, bulger-clad and carrying a second protective suit for his comrade. Here you are, pal. Where do we go from here? Out of town on the East Highway. I'll show you. A hill rising out of... Hey, wait a minute. Who's driving this crate? Bud looked embarrassed. Oh, she is. She? Miss Graham, she... Refused, chimed in Lynn Graham, to be left out of it. Indeed I did. Captain Russell, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, deceiving us the way you did. When the sergeant here told me who you really were and what you were doing here, I almost died with excitement. And to think that you, a captain in the SID, pretended to be a mythologist. It's the funniest thing. Miss Graham, interrupted Rocky impatiently, there is nothing at all amusing about the job we are engaged in. It is, moreover, no work in which a girl should be involved. You would oblige me by returning to the fort on the first transport bus. Oh, no. This is a patrol roller, and I requisitioned it in my own name. Either I drive it or, stubbornly, it doesn't roll. Very well, then. You may take us as far as the desert path, but there we leave you. And now let's get going. We've wasted enough time as it is. Rocky motioned Bud into the roller. A few seconds later, they were speeding noiselessly out on the highway toward the spot where Rocky had seen the truck leave the road. Russell had been keeping an eye on his chronometer for the past little while, estimating the number of daylight minutes left to him. On this little satellite, there was no such thing as dusk or twilight. At 90 million miles from Sol, there was little enough sunlight. Titan's main radiance came not from the sun, but from its own parent planet, which, a huge shining platter in the sky, gathered up and reflected to its tiny satellite the thin illumination from afar, for all the world like a gigantic reflecting mirror. Titan revolved on its axis in 15 hours, 23 minutes. Almost the whole of its day period had elapsed now. Shortly, yes, even as he studied out the problem, night came suddenly and completely to this part of Titan. It descended instantaneously, snuffing out the light as a finger presses the wick of a candle. Only the stars remained, glowing white in the rich jet vastness of outer space. The girl reached toward the dashboard instinctively, but Rocky's hand clasped about her wrist. No, don't. But I was only going to turn on the lights. I know, but you mustn't. We're getting very close to the spot now. Can you see to drive without them? Why, I guess so, said Lynn dubiously. She was surprised herself to learn that she could. Why, yes, the road stands out like a dark ribbon against the sands on either side. Isn't that strange? Not so strange at that, grunted Rocky. I'm beginning to get an idea about the mysterious T radiation of this planet. I may be completely wrong, of course, but so far my theory fits all the facts I've observed. There's something I would like to know, though. Grossman told us the soil killed humans. I wonder how they die. I can answer that. Daddy told me the first day I was here. He was warning me against ever leaving the shielded areas. The fort, the city, the roads. He said that if they wander onto the soil of Titan without protection, humans just shrivel up and crumble into dust like mummies. Like mummies, eh? Grunted Rocky. He sounded quite well satisfied. Then that fits too. Yes, I'm beginning to understand a lot of things, including the reason Factor Grossman would like to rid this little world of all competitors. Well, don't keep secrets, snapped Bud. We'd like to know too. What's it all about? No time now. There's the hill out yonder. Pull up here, Miss Lynn. Here's where we leave you. Lynn stopped the roller obediently, but as Bud and Rocky climbed out, she asked, What do you want me to do now? Can't I come with you? No, you turn the roller around and wait here. We have no idea what we're going to buck up against. We may have to retreat suddenly. If so, I'll fire 3 blasts on my Hammelholtz, 2 short, 1 long. If you see that signal, get ready to start moving. We'll come on the double quick. But if we're being pursued too closely to make it, yes? Then don't wait for us, ordered Rocky. Head for the base and bring the patrolman, understand? All but one thing, complained the girl. Why not send for a platoon of patrolmen right now? Why wait until it's too late? Because, explained Rocky patiently, despite our suspicions, we have as yet no actual proof that the Factor is involved in anything shady. The Patrol is an organization sworn to maintain the law, not to violate it, riding roughshod over the rights and privileges of citizens. When we are certain, as I fully expect we shall be shortly, that Grossman is implicated in some illegal scheme, then we can call in the Patrol. But until that time, broke in an oily, taunting voice, you will play the part of quixotic fools, eh, my dear doctor? But has it never occurred to you that by the time you get the proof you want, it may be too late to summon help? Rocky whirled, as did his two companions, from the side of the road where they had lain in dark concealment behind a low escarpment rose a circle of shadowy figures. The largest of these, a heavy-set man looming even greater in his protective bulger, approached them. In his left hand he held a flash. Its rays glinted upon still another instrument in his right hand, the tube of a Hammelholtz burner held steadily upon them. All recognized the newcomer's voice at once. Grossman! End of Colossus of Chaos by Nelson Bond, Part 1. Colossus of Chaos by Nelson Bond. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cindy Morton. Colossus of Chaos by Nelson Bond, Part 2. 8. In the gloom, Grossman's features could not be seen behind the quartzite view pane of his bulger, but by the thick satisfaction in his voice, Rocky could guess the complacent smirk lingering on his over-red lips. Yes, my friends, he acknowledged, Grossman. This is somewhat of a reversal, no? The one you came to apprehend has captured you. My dear Dr. Roswell, did you consider me a perfect fool? Did you not know the driver of my roller would report to me that you had followed him to this spot? Rocky said levelly, Not Dr. Roswell, Grossman. My name is Russell, Captain Russell of the SID, and it is my duty to advise you that you stand self-convicted of armed assault upon the persons of legal officers engaged in the performance of their duties. Anything you say may later be used against you. Grossman laughed. My soul, Captain, you are a cool one. Not the same man at all as the learned doctor who was afraid of firearms. It is too bad you have blundered into this situation. I rather admired your effrontery. We could have been friends, I think. The question, said Rocky dryly, is open to argument. Lynn Graham bridled. This is all very high-handed, Mr. Grossman, and very mysterious. What is all this talk of capturing someone? What do you intend to do with us? Grossman said soothingly, Have no fear, Miss Graham. You will come to no harm, but I fear for the present I shall be compelled to take you into, well, shall we call it protective custody? You see, I have, certain plans. It would not do for these plans to be overthrown at the final moment. Therefore, I must request you to be my guests until I have succeeded in gaining my objective. Which is, interrupted Rocky harshly, complete control of Titan? Exactly, Captain Russell. And its wealth? And its... Grossman stopped abruptly, the tone of his voice altering. Then you know. Enough, said Russell, enough to warn you, Grossman, that it won't work. This isn't the first time you know that an individual has tried to discard interplanetary law and seize control of some rich plum. The penal colonies are full of ambitious men like yourself who thought they could defy the space control. But it won't work, Grossman. No man or group of men wields sufficient power to defeat the forces of justice and order. Grossman chuckled again. this time delightedly. You know a little, Captain. Yes, but not enough. Titan will be mine, and soon, because I have found an ally powerful enough to win me my demands. You doubt? Very well. You shall see for yourself. Come. He spun to his little coterie of followers, snapped commands in the strange guttural tongue of Titan. The oddly assorted creatures, some humanoid in form, some frighteningly animalistic, formed a rough guard about Rocky and Bud. Grossman hesitated before Lynn. You have no protective suit. That is unfortunate. It would, of course, be fatal for you to accompany us across the sands without one. Yet I cannot permit you to go free. Gruschel? Yes, master. Take the girl to my office building in the city and keep her there until I come. She must not escape, nor may she communicate with any other humans. You understand? Yes, master. Very well. Take her away. And now, gentlemen, if you are quite ready, forward, march. The Titanians behind Bud and Rocky prodded. Helpless in the face of vastly superior odds, the two SID men stumbled forward off the highway and across the rough desert toward the hill dully gleaming a short distance away. Seated at the controls of the tiny roller, Lynn Graham was thinking furiously as she drove. Obviously, there was no chance of escaping so long as that flabby-fleshed parody of manhood crouched behind her with a hammer-holtz leveled at the small of her back. Yet somehow she must get away, get to the fort, and bring the patrol. Guile. That was her only chance. Take advantage of the slow-thinking Titanian's inferior mentality. She turned and smiled back over her shoulder. Have you ever been to the patrol base before? She asked pleasantly. Gruschel answered mechanically, yes, many times. Then the implication of her words penetrated his brute brain. Before? But we are not going to the patrol base. Maybe, retorted Lynn airily. You're not, but I am. Just as fast as this roller will carry me. Gruschel's heavy brows gathered in perplexity. But no, you are to drive to the office building. There await the master. Lynn laughed. What nonsense! So long as I am the driver of this roller, I will take it where I wish. Then, said Gruschel thoughtfully, I will be forced to shoot you. You must not escape. But you can't do that, Lynn pointed out shrewdly. Factor Grossman said nothing about shooting me. He ordered that I was to be kept safely until he came. Yes, pondered the Titanian, that is true. But I see no other way to... I am afraid you will have to let me drive to Fort Beauséjour. So long as I am driving, there is nothing you can do to prevent me from taking the roller where I wish. Gruschel, who had been wrestling laboriously with the problem, now suddenly saw the light. His deep-set eyes brightened. Oh, no, there is another way, he cried triumphantly. I will drive the roller. But, cried Lynn. That is the solution. Stop the roller. You and I will change places. I will drive. You will move back here. Obediently, Lynn drew the car to a halt, slipped from the driver's cubicle as the Titanian moved from the rear seat to take her place. Gruschel smiled at her complacently. You see, he boasted, it is really very simple. Now I can stop the roller wherever I wish. The master will be obeyed. He reached for the controls, laying his hammer-holtz on the cushion beside him as he did so. That was what Lynn had been waiting for. In one sudden motion, she leaned forward, scooped up the weapon. Sorry, Gruschel, she cried, but it's you or me. She slashed the tube down hard on the Titanian's scalp. Gruschel groaned once, heavily, and sagged. His hands, falling away, dragged at the steering control stick. In an instant, the car jerked into convulsive motion, charged toward the edge of the road. Lynn screamed and tugged at the door beside her. In a moment more, she would have been carried out across the deadly sands without a shield of any sort. But just as the roller left the road, The girl threw herself through the door, fell sprawling on the edge of the roadbed. The roller bounced out 50, 100, 200 yards into the desert land, then stalled. It lay there, a dark form dimly outlined against the thin iridescence of the soil, a silent vehicle bearing a single unconscious occupant. Lynn Graham stared at it dolefully for a few moments. Then, because there was no use crying over spilt milk or lost means of transportation, she turned and hurried toward the city as quickly as possible, afoot. As they approached the hill in the darkness, the two SID men were aware of much activity going on around them. They heard the cries of foremen, the grunts of laborers, the chuff-chuff of an old-fashioned combustion engine, and the high, shrilling whinnying of a single high-powered automotor. Rocky glanced at the new Boston factor inquisitively. "Mining, Grossman? Already?" Grossman chuckled. "Mining, yes, but not for what you think. Before we mine for wealth, we must mine for power." "Mine for power? You shall see in a moment what I mean." Grossman motioned one of his native aides to him. "Oh, there. He is secure? The mighty one is shackled as I commanded?" "Oh, yes, master. He is bound, wrist and ankle." "Good. And the excavation?" "Proceeds on schedule, master. By dawn it should be finished." "That is well, for if he still grows—" "He does, oh master." "Dawn will be none too soon. The cavern will no longer hold him." Bud whispered to his friend and superior, "Say, what goes on here? What are they talking about?" "If I'm not greatly mistaken," answered Rocky, "the thing for which those manacles were made." Verification of his guess came almost immediately. Again their guards prodded them forward, and behind Grossman they entered a passageway dipping into the side of the hill. Through an ancient tunnel, damp and malodorous, they marched, debouching finally into a gigantic cavern, a huge bubble of emptiness blown into the solid rock of some forgotten geologic age of change. And there at last before them stood— No, it did not stand. There was no longer room for it to stand upright in an underground cavern whose roof was but 300 feet high. It crouched. It knelt upon all fours like a great mute beast, knelt and stared with dumbly questioning eyes at the tiny motes now entering its lair to look upon it. It had been secured, as the Titanian had said, with great metal manacles from the welded joints of which stretched mighty chains so huge that a man might walk upright through a single loop. Its wrists were also gyved, and a length of chain swung between the two. But it made no effort to fight these bonds. It just crouched there in the strange semi-gloom, watching with pale gleaming eyes the movements of its self-proclaimed master. Subconsciously, Rocky Russell had been expecting just some such revelation as this. Even so, it was one case where realization of an idea far surpassed speculation. A gasp of sheer astonishment wrenched itself from his lips. He stared at the giant with shocked incredulity. "Colossus!" he choked. "Lord, the Colossus himself come to life! Grossman, where did you find this?" Grossman smiled urbanely. "Not a bad name for him, Captain. Your brief period of masquerade as a mythologist apparently left some impression on you. Colossus, yes, but this time no brainless monster of brass. A living creature, intelligent and obedient to my commands. You there," he turned and addressed his slave, again utilizing the Menevisal unit. "You know your orders? You know what must be done?" The creature had telepathic power commensurate with its bulk. The mental answer came rolling into the brains of the Earthmen with almost audible force. "I know my orders. I know what must be done." "And who is master? Whose will must be obeyed?" This, thought Rocky with swiftest haste, was sheer braggadocio, and typical of Grossman. It was not necessary to bludgeon a servile answer out of the gigantic captive. He had already proven his point. But if the question had been intended to elicit a humble deference, it failed in its purpose. For the Colossus did not answer. Instead, it continued to stare down at its accoster mutely, speculatively, almost, thought Rocky, defiantly. "Well," repeated Grossman, "who is master here?" And this time, whipping a tube from his holster, he accompanied the question with a rapier-like lash of fire that swept across the Colossus's hurriedly upraised palm. For at sight of the gun, at the crackle of the heat beam, the giant had begun to stammer a hasty, "You, oh master, you are master, you." And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped, and over its features spread a strange, strained look. What that expression meant, Rocky could not guess. It seemed to mirror surprise, vast, pleased surprise. The giant lifted the palm across which Grossman's ray had swept and studied it with sluggish interest. It drew a finger of its other hand across what should be a badly burned piece of flesh and began smiling. It was an evil smile. There was no mirth in it, just grim, savage exultation and determination. Then deliberately it reached forward and attempted to grasp Grossman. This time it was the factor who fell back hurriedly. A cry burst from his lips. He pointed the Helmholtz at the giant and coldly, murderously, turned its ray to the maximum concentration. The air of the confined quarters seethed and crackled with blistering heat as the livid flame blasted its way to its target. But the Colossus laughed. It was the first time human ears had ever heard a sound from that inhuman throat, nor did those who heard it ever want to hear it again. From those great gaping lips, towering yards above them, pealed a deep-pitched torrent like the simultaneous rolling of 1,000 summer thunders. It was a sound to batter, blast and deafen the eardrums. Were it not for the bulgers in which they were clad, the earthen would in that moment have been stricken with instantaneous deafness. As it was, Rocky's ears rang fearsomely with the vibrations of the Colossus's laughter, muted as the sound was through his helmet diaphragm. And Grossman's flame meant nothing. The Colossus ignored it as if it were a dancing sunbeam briefly flickering across his flesh. Again, he stretched forth an avid, clutching hand. Grossman screamed aloud in panic, fear, and ran. Into the narrow tunnel he darted, where that mighty hand could not follow and close about him. Through the tunnel, out and up from the depths of the underground cavern, behind him ran the unguarded duo he had called his captives. At the mouth of the tunnel, attracted by the tumult, were gathered a knot of Titanians. To these Grossman panted swift commands. "The mouth of the tunnel! Close and block it immediately! The Colossus has gone mad! And the excavation! Stop working on it!" "But, master, it is almost finished." "All the worse! Fill it in again! He must not break free! He will destroy us all!" Grossman turned to Rocky and pawed at him beseechingly. "Russell, call the base! Tell the colonel to send men here! Guns! This creature!" Russell said sternly, "Rather sudden change of heart, Grossman. A few short minutes ago, the Colossus was your ally, the aid through whose efforts you were going to force the patrol off Titan and gain sole possession for yourself." "That doesn't matter now. I was ambitious. Yes, I had dreams of being a king, an emperor. You know why, Russell. You're a clever man. You guessed the reason for the T radiation. But I did not dream, when the egg was hatched 2 days ago, that its occupant would continue to grow and grow and grow." Grossman's voice rose hysterically. "It is a madness from space come to kill us all. I thought at first I could use it, bend it to my will. It was afraid of flame. But now it's grown too large, its flesh too thick, to mind such puny weapons. It is strong, Russell, inconceivably strong. It is practically invulnerable. Bud said, But what you're doing ought to hold it in check. If you bury it alive, don't feed it. Feed it? Grossman laughed mirthlessly. It doesn't need feeding. Don't you understand? It has never been fed a mouthful in its life. Never been? Rocky stared at the shaking Factor. But do you realize what that means? It does not eat, yet it continues to grow. From somewhere it must be deriving the nourishment to gorge its cells. From somewhere. Rocky? Bud's voice interrupted him suddenly. It was a voice cracked with terror and strain. Rocky, quick! We gotta get out of here! Look! The earth! Quaking! His warning was superfluous. All present had experienced the trembling at the same time, a violent, insistent rocking of the soil beneath their feet. Now gaunt Titanians, panic-stricken, were fleeing in all directions. Grossman had stumbled and fallen to his knees. Rocky bent over him, lifted him by main force, and howled into his ear. A roller, Grossman! You must have a private roller somewhere around here. Where is it? Oh, over there. Factor pointed uncertainly at a gray bulk dim in the gloom. Then come on, snapped Rocky. We've got to get to New Boston. New Boston? The city? But why? We want to get to the patrol base. New Boston, Rocky grated. First. That's where you sent Lynn Graham, remember? Gad! I didn't think he could do it, but he is. Start this roller, Grossman, and let's get out of here. Quick! Look! The Colossus! The others stared, and a little whimper escaped Grossman's slack lips as he saw the final act of the drama which had begun with the trembling of the earth beneath them. The thin iridescence of the hillside was seamed and cracked with a myriad of tiny black veins. The whole hummock quivered and trembled as though stricken with some meteorologic ague. And then suddenly, with a crash like that of rolling doom, the whole crown of the hill seemed to erupt explosively before them. Gigantic boulders ripped loose from ancient bedrock and raced wildly down tattered slopes. A myriad tiny fragments burst skyward, sifted down as a hail of deadly debris. There came the rending, tearing, grating sound of stone grinding against stone, cacophonous background for the cries of maddened Titanians, the screech of roller motors roaring into action, the moans of injured and dying natives. Then Colossus burst from the womb of the hampering earth, rose to stand upright in the prison he had outgrown. He shook himself, and detritus scattered about the terrified watchers. He raised a great palm, and with demonic deliberation brought it squarely down upon a tiny band of huddled and terrified natives. When he lifted his palm again, it dripped redly. Rocky thrust the fumbling Grossman from the controls. Move over! Let me at the stick! In a flash, he had started the roller's motor, sent the speedster tearing headlong and recklessly across broken desert flooring. Not a moment too soon, for the Colossus, having once shed blood, now swung into a literal orgy of savage destruction. Like a huge brainless automaton, he flailed the hillside about him clean of every moving thing, beating with gigantic steel-hard fists at anything and everything he saw, until that thing lay like a flattened pulp on the ground. And all the while, horrendous laughter pealed incessantly from his contorted lips. Laughter which carried to New Boston miles away, even to the patrol base beyond the city. Laughter which struck terror into the hearts of listeners who did not know as yet, happily, whence it came, or the awful fate which lay in store for them. For Colossus wearied now of lingering in his pit. He placed a palm on either side of the chasm he had opened for his escape and vaulted easily to the surface. The enormous manacles with which his captors had hoped to hold him dangled uselessly. The ground shuddered beneath him. Where his feet met earth, they forced depressions. Colossus was drawing sustenance now at ever-increasing speed from the soil which fed his odd, unnatural appetite. Already he was taller than New Boston's highest building. More than a quarter mile he towered into the air, and still he grew. 9. Lynn Graham plodded at long and weary last into the outskirts of the city, wondered again with the vague, dull incuriosity which was the only emotion of which her exhausted brain was capable. What had been the meaning of those sounds she had heard from the desert wastes behind her a few hours ago? It was all very mysterious and alarming. First had come the wails. Not wails, really, but dreadful, ear-splitting howls like the bellowing of some monstrous beast. Then, out of the darkness behind her had come hurtling a small roller, a madly ricocheting vehicle without lights. She had attempted to signal the driver, but in vain, as well as try to hitch a ride on a runaway comet as that speeding car. And now she was entering a city which ought to be asleep, but instead was seething with furious activity. Lights shone from the windows of the buildings, shacks, stores. Crowds congregated at corners, huddled groups of frightened figures that looked astonishingly like mobs of refugees. It was as though a mass panic had seized the entire city. Earthmen gathered their families fearfully about them. Titanians scurried, slithered, hobbled in every direction in helter-skelter confusion. Vainly, Lynn accosted passers-by in search of an explanation. Her queries were met with terror-numbed stares, with mumbles, with incomprehensible mouthings. We heard. Danger approaching. Someone said. Must leave the city. They told us. Giant beast. Death. Despairing of ever learning the truth from such informants, Lynn fought her way to a public audio booth. After a longer than usual wait, her call was put through. Over the selenoplate, she stared into the worried eyes of her father. A prayer of relief and gratitude escaped the colonel as he recognized his caller. Lynn, thank the Lord you're safe. I've been worried sick about you, and so is that young doctor. Rocky? You mean he and Bud escaped? They're with you at the base? Russell is. Mulligan has gone out with the fleet on scout patrol. Fleet? Stammered Lynn. Scout patrol? Daddy, what is this all about? I seem to be the only person on this world who doesn't know what's wrong. A voice at the other end of the wire said politely, May I, sir? And Colonel Graham's face faded back to be replaced by the grave, sharp-lined features of the young SID captain. Lynn, he began, and even in that tense moment, Lynn Graham found time to wonder that he had dropped all pretense of formality. Lynn, we are all in the gravest peril. Colossus has broken loose. Colossus? The thing for which those manacles were forged turned out to be a giant humanoid. Bud and I saw it. It was more than 1,000 feet tall when it escaped Grossman. Now it has more than doubled that height. Lynn gasped. But where is it? After it broke from its underground cell, it headed west. For almost 7 hours, it's been roaming the planet wildly. And at will, it completely destroyed the mining town of Hawsbury and the villages of Placer and Dry Ditch. But aren't we doing anything to stop it? It must be destroyed. 3 flights are out looking for it. 2 haven't been able to contact it at all. The 3rd is unreported. We fear that flight found it. Russell's voice was more sober than ever. Lynn, our weapons seem to be useless against it. Its skin is incredibly tough, hard, resistant. Heat does not bother it, and our heaviest HE shells are like pebbles upon a hippo's hide. But there must be some way. There has got to be some way, nodded Russell, for if we don't find it, and soon, Titan will be a dead world, peopled by a single, monstrous entity. Now, he abandoned explanations for a more immediate problem. You stand tight. I'm coming to New Boston to get you. Oh, that's not necessary. I'll hire a transport. There's no such thing. The road between here and the city is and has been thronged with refugees for hours. I don't believe there's a commercial roller left in the city. Because, you see... Yes? Pressed Lynn as he hesitated. Never mind. I'll be right there for you. You were going to tell me something, Rocky. What? Well, said Rocky reluctantly, I guess you'd better know. According to the seismograph, Colossus has almost completed his circumambulation of Titan and is on his way back toward New Boston. You must be very, very careful. And now, goodbye. See you later. The circuit faded and he was gone. Lynn stood for a moment thinking swiftly. Then she decided better to do something than to just sit waiting in a city gone mad with fear. She would start toward the base now, meet Rocky on the way. Having made her decision, she turned quickly and took her place in the jostling throng pressing southward. Rocky, moving north on the New Boston Safeway as he wormed his roller through the ever-thickening mass of panicky Titanians and terrified Earth colonists rushing to the safety of the base, was once again, for perhaps the 100th time, trying to grasp that elusive half-thought which had lurked in the back of his brain ever since Colossus had broken free. Something Grossman had said. Grossman, who now cowered in a patrol cell far from the haughty, autocratic figure he had pretended to be, had brushed a spark in Rocky's mind. But now that spark had dulled, and Rocky could not recapture it. It had something to do with Colossus. It suggested some means of combating... Damnation! The hordes of refugees had been parting like a flesh sea before him ever since he left the fort gates. But now the numbers were becoming so great that he could not move the roller through them except at a crawl. He realized this and gave up the unequal struggle. He called an earthman to him. Here, can you drive a roller? Yes, indeed, sir. Then take this back to Colonel Graham at the fort. Tell him Captain Russell is going ahead on foot. The colonist stared at him strikingly. Do you mean you're going back toward the city, sir? But you can't do that. It's suicide. They say a huge monster 10 miles tall is coming to smash the city to pieces. Rocky said tightly, Never mind that now. You give my message to the commandant. Understand? And he climbed from the car and forced his way against the tide northward on foot. It was as he was pressing along that he thought of Bud Milligan, who had gone out with B-Flight in an effort to find and destroy, or at least delay, Colossus. Thinking of Bud reminded him they wore on their persons the means of constant communication. The chances were greatly against Bud's being on the beam, but it was worth a try. He took the miniature vocoder from his breast pocket and activated it on the secret SID wavelength. Vastly to his surprise, he got an immediate reply. Oh, Q Chief, where in the tuffet have you been? I've been buzzing you for the past hour and a half. Rocky signaled back. Where are you, Bud? Look north, ordered Bud, and east. About 30,000 elevation, you'll see 5 black dots in the sky. They ain't asterisks. They're us. Flight B. Keeping an eye on the mountain that walks like a man. Then he's in sight? How can you miss him? He's bigger than the landscape. Can't you see him yet? No. Well, I'm afraid you will. He's heading your way now. Keep an eye on the horizon and... A sudden roar rose from the throng swarming the Safeway. It was a roar of fear, but deeper even than the note of fear was that of awe. Rocky looked up from his vocoder swiftly, beheld two things simultaneously. First, the dawn of a new day, Saturn rise breaking suddenly over the horizon, brooming all shadows in its path immediately. And the second phenomenon? Colossus. Colossus rising over the horizon. A head, then a mighty neck, broad shoulders, naked torso, rising from the other side of the world like a vast bestial nightmare. A tremendous Colossus whose head was so far above the veiled cloudlets of Titan that from time to time he was forced to bob and weave in order to avoid collisions with the rogues, those tiny bits of cosmic debris escaped from Saturn's ring which besprinkle space in the neighborhood of the girdled planet. "Rocky!" Bud was chattering on the vocoder. "Rocky, what's the matter? CX, Rocky Russell! CX, Rocky Russell! Are you all right, Rocky?" Rocky answered slowly. "I'm all right, Bud, but I just saw him. We all just saw him. He's tremendous." "You're telling me. See them manacles? He's grown so big they split in half right up the back. They look like the only reason they're hanging on is because they're embedded in his flesh. And his height? Phew! The navigator here just shot an estimate. Over 6,000 feet, Rocky. Colossus is more than a mile high." Rocky said, "Keep on the beam, Bud. And don't mind if I don't answer you immediately. I'm fighting my way north on the Safeway, hunting for Lynn. She's in New Boston." "New Boston?" Bud's voice was horror-stricken. "My lord, no! She mustn't be, Rocky. That's where he's heading for right now. He can see it. He's got a glint in his eye, a bloodlust. Oh, great gods of space, Rocky!" The voice died in a tiny wail. Russell needed no explanation of his agonized words, for he too saw the climax of that frightful action. Colossus had climbed completely over the horizon now. There was no doubt he had spotted the city. He seemed fascinated by its twin towers, like a destructive child experimenting with some new toy. He leaned over, gripped the spire of the nearest between a massive thumb and forefinger, and snapped it off. From the shard of stone and metal, wherein a few desperate fugitives had taken refuge, dropped tiny motes, tumbling hundreds of feet to certain, dreadful doom. Rocky could not hear their screams, but he could imagine them. One of those black fragments might have been, could have been. He shook his head doggedly. "No, you must not think of such things. Lynn still lived, must live." Then another sound burst so close to him that for a moment his tense nerves shrieked in agony. A mighty hissing roar, the explosive blast of a rotor gun going into action. Glancing to his right, he found himself beside the very gun embrasure wherein yesterday, Lord, only yesterday, not 100,000 centuries ago, a jovial gunner had told Dr. Rockingham Roswell fabulously genial tales of monstrous beasts. Could either of them have guessed that today? "Gunner!" he cried. The old warrior glanced up, identified him among the hordes of refugees. "Oh, you, Professor. Come on, I'm short-handed here. Crew didn't make it afore the attack. If you're still looking for fabulous monsters, here's your chance to get some first-hand experience." Rocky needed no second invitation. A terrible rage was upon him now. Futile to attempt to any longer buck the mob to New Boston, still more than 3 miles away. If Lynn had been in the city, neither he nor any man could help her now. The only thing he could do was avenge her. He dropped into the pit and swung instantly into action. "What do you need here?" "Oh, short a prime loader, eh? All right, gunner." He spun toward the charged Rio, jazzed its fill to max, slammed home the breech of the rotor, snapped, "OQ, charge set." "Range?" said gunner mechanically. "Fire!" The beam blasted away. Then, and only then, did the old fighter seem to realize what had happened. His leathery old face crinkled and he stared at Rocky in bewilderment. Hey, wait a minute. What's going on here, Professor? Where'd you ever learn to prime load a Mallory rotor? The same place, grunted Rocky. You saw a purple bird with 6 green wings and a lavender tail. Stop loafing. Let's get that beast another bellyful. Charge set. Range, said Gunner automatically. Fire! A slow grin overspread his face. Comets. Looks like I pulled the wrong guy's leg, hey? But not long did Rocky work with the gun crew. Came another buzz from Milligan aloft, and this time the SID sergeant's news was worse than ever before. It's no good, Rocky. Neither the ground fire nor our aerial blasts are having any effect on him. Heat beams don't even make his muscles twitch. And as for physical ordnance, the shells don't even penetrate his hide. Rocky cried, But there has to be some way to stop him, Bud. He's practically on top of New Boston now. After that, he'll turn on the patrol base. And crush us all out, conceded Bud dolefully, like a bad kid stomping out an ant heap. That's all we are to him, just so many ants. There's only one way left. The flight leader has decided we got to use ourselves as human shells, Rocky. Bullets won't harm him, but if we can smash these ships into some vulnerable spot, his eyes, perhaps we can kill him before we... Wait! Cried Rocky. Ants! That's it, not ants, but antaeus. Bud, listen carefully. Those craft are equipped with repulsor beams. Why, yes, but... Then contact your flight leader immediately. Tell him these are orders. As an SID agent, it is your privilege to take over any command in case of urgency. I want the 3 ships of your flight to turn on their repulsor beams to maximum strength and bear down on the Colossus. But Rocky, do as I say. Yeah, sure. But if they don't lift him... Don't be an ass. Repulsors are used to move asteroids from trade lanes, aren't they? Colossus is huge, but no bigger than thousands of asteroids. They'll lift him off the face of this world. And then? Then we shall see, said Rocky grimly, if I have saved us or just given us a few minutes' grace. If I'm wrong, he'll fight his way free as soon as the repulsors wear down. But if I'm right... Well, I've got to be right. And now, get going. Yes, sir, gulped Bud obediently and disconnected to contact the flight commander of the space vessels. Thus it was a few moments later, as Rocky and Gunner lay in their pit watching hopefully as the unceasing throngs continued to block the safeway, casting fearful looks back over their shoulders as they fled from one doomed place to another, that the 5 ships gathered together momentarily, then separated, then converged on the Colossus in a narrow V, their prows invisibly pouring repulsor radiation at the gigantic creature. The reaction of Colossus was the only thing which assured Rocky his plan was being carried out, for the repulsor radiation was colorless. But as the ships neared Colossus, he bent, momentarily, at the middle as if he'd suffered a surprise thrust in the belly or groin. Then an expression of anger crossed his features. The ships were coming in beneath the protection of a cloud bank, but Colossus spotted them. He flailed a whip-like arm at them as a pettish child might sweep at bothersome flies. But to no avail. The speedy craft swirled away, but kept their prows pointed at his midriff. Again Colossus struck at them and smashed one. Then a new idea struck him. Reaching above his head, by sheer force, he tugged from a styletic course about Titan a rogue rock of tremendous size, a rock which must have been every bit of 1,500 feet in diameter, a shard of matter hewn into a perfect sphere by long ages in the rings of Saturn. This he clutched and aimed at the spacecraft. Let it be hurled upon them, Rocky knew, and in an instant every spark of life would be dashed from existence as the metal walls of the ships were beaten flat. But the sphere was not hurled. It was the Colossus who gave way, not the ships. The cumulative pressure of the repulsor beams caused him to yield, bend, stagger. He tried to regain his balance with a lurching stride forward, and thus it was that the Twin Towers, pride of New Boston, were destroyed. Colossus's left foot descended crushingly upon the buildings, and when it withdrew a moment later, a yawning hole gaped where had been city streets, a hole partly filled with the crumbled masonry of the once proud skyscrapers. But Colossus staggered back one step, and another, and still another. Then one foot slipped into the air and did not descend. After it went the other foot, and Colossus was off the ground. Off the ground and being pressed further and further out into space with every passing moment. A great cheer, a cheer which had in it half a sob, rose from the Safeway beside the gunnery pit. Rocky Russell glanced up at the hordes who had turned to behold this last moment salvation, felt a moment of pain strike at his heart. Saved, a world, and all of these saved. But the one most important person in this or any world, and then he saw her. She had been fighting beside him in this very pit, weary, disheveled, eyes haggard, but still to him beautiful. And it could not have been a mere coincidence that she saw him at the same moment. Their eyes met, and no longer was there need for words. Both knew what the other was thinking. Both accepted the decisions of their hearts gladly. Without a word, she turned and fled into the circle of his arms. While up above, Bud Milligan was signaling desperately. "Rocky! CX Rocky Russell! Damn it to hell! Where are you? What do we do now? Our beams can't hold this mountain up here forever. What do you want us to do?" Great guns of grief! Colossus dwindled. Like a tinfoil effigy held over a flame, his tremendous bulk began to slough away. It did not fall off in chunks or clots. There was no destruction of his flesh, not horrid streams of blood flowing from open wounds. Colossus simply disappeared. A mile-high, roaring monster pinned on invisible repulsor beams, then a half-mile creature screaming in panic, then a massive thing, 1,000, 500, 50, 5, 2 feet tall, then a small gray shapeless wisp hanging like a shredded tatter in space, a sudden silent puff of flame, then nothing. So found its final resting place the thing which came from afar, the thing which, in accordance with the theories of a scientist it had never heard of, had journeyed through black space to spawn on a hospitable world. So ended another of nature's blind attempts to convey a life form from one galaxy to another. So ended Colossus. 10. Afterwards, Bud Milligan said solemnly, "If you didn't see it very plain from where you was, I ain't gonna explain what it looked like. It was, well, ugly, that's all. What I want to know is, how did you know it would dry up and crumble away if we could lift it off the ground, Rocky?" Russell grinned. He said, "I suppose you'd be highly chagrined to learn it was really you who gave me the idea." "Me?" "Yes. When you mentioned ants, the word reminded me of a dim thought I had been trying all day to recapture without success. It reminded me of Antaeus." "Andy who?" "Antaeus. You'll find his story in the folk tales of our mother planet, Earth. Hercules, while engaged on his famous labors, met this giant in mortal combat. Antaeus was a son of Mother Earth, and from her he derived his tremendous strength. Each time Hercules felled him, he grew larger. At last the hero discovered Antaeus' secret and overcame him by lifting him completely above his head. Antaeus then dwindled, as did our own Colossus." "Comets!" gaped Bud. "That's exactly what happened. But why?" Because, explained his friend, Colossus devoured not food as we do, but energy. Raw, radiant energy. Titan not only fed him, it gave him a banquet. The storage battery which is this planet. Eh? Interrupted Colonel Graham, startled. What's that, Captain? Storage battery? Yes, Colonel. That is the secret of Titan. The secret Grossman learned and hoped to capitalize on after he had frightened or forced all other Earthmen, including the Space Patrol, off this globe. Titan is not simply a world. It is a gigantic storage battery. Its acid seas and metallic mountains are a parallel of the simple voltaic cell. The mysterious T radiation is nothing more nor less than constantly reversing polarity on a gigantic scale. Humans are destroyed by it for the same reason they die in an electric chair. Titanians can endure it because they are endowed with the physical characteristic of being poor conductors. Colossus fed on this steady stream of current, and in him electrical energy transmuted into matter. How, we do not know, nor will we ever now, unless someday another of Colossus's race is cast by the tides of time upon the shores of one of our solar planets. Which, whispered Bud, God forbid. Well, just goes to show you everything happens for the best, doesn't it? I mean, if you hadn't masqueraded as a doctor of mythology so we could trap Grossman and shove him into the clink like he is now... I might not have guessed, acknowledged Rocky, the reason for Colossus's bulk. Yes, that's right. But speaking of myths, he turned to the girl. Oh, it's not you I want to ask, but your father. I would like to know, Colonel Graham, have I permission to track down one final myth as Dr. Roswell and make her become Mrs. Russell? Colonel Graham smiled. Well, Captain, he began, but Bud interrupted him, groaning. My God, what a terrible pun. You had to stretch that one a mile, Rocky. It was then that Lynn Graham proved herself a suitable future wife in all respects, for she smiled gently and said, Well, why not, Bud? She demanded, according to the old adage, a myth is as good as a mile. End of Colossus of Chaos by Nelson Bond, Part 2. End of Colossus of Chaos.
Garrity's Annuities by David Mason. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Garrity's Annuities by David Mason. You might say Garrity brought it on himself. The way I put it, Garrity was the architect of his own disasters. It's a nicely put phrase, I think. Anyway, a lot of people tried to tell him what might happen. I did, for one, though I'd never have thought it would happen in just that way. What I would have predicted for Garrity would be trouble, but just ordinary trouble. Jail, or getting his space engineer's ticket suspended, or something like that. Not the kind of trouble he's got. I remember distinctly the first time I heard Garrity explaining his theory. It wasn't a new theory, but the way Garrity talked about it, you'd think he'd invented it personally. We were sitting in the mess room in the Aloha. That was the old Aloha, the one that belonged to the Muller space lines. Talking about women, trip like that. Neither Garrity nor I had ever touched down on Serenus, which was where we'd be in another week or so. The other off-watch man, Gloucester, had been there several times and liked the place. A lot of Earthside Oriental in 'em, Gloucester said. They're little brown characters, real obliging. The girls especially. You just treat 'em polite, and they'll treat you right back. Uh-huh, I said, considering the idea. Garrity curled his long lip. It'll cost you just as much in the end. Women are always looking for something. Not this kind on Serenus, Gloucester said. Best port I've ever been in. I'm staying on the Aloha till I get to putting curtains on my cabin port." Garrity shook his head. He looked as cynical as he could for his age, which was 24. We were all of us fresh out of lunar, with the ink hardly dry on our engineer tickets. "I'll tell you," said Garrity, "I haven't seen a woman yet that wouldn't cost you more than she was worth in the long run." "Long run?" I asked him. "We don't spend more than a few days down on Serenus. Isn't going to be any long run. If she runs, let her to catch her before take-off time." Gloucester chuckled, but Garrity just looked righteous. "You'll see what I mean," he told us. "Yeah," Gloucester said. "I guess you and me will go downtown and pick up a couple girls and take in some high-priced amusements, like listening to records at the Spacemen's Union Lounge. After which we hurl our hard-earned cash away on a quart of pink arrack, and we take the girls home with it. In the morning we haven't got a credit left, so we blast off with nothing but a set of beautiful memories." Gloucester crowed. "What's the matter, anyway, Garrity? The Union gets us the best wage scale in any space fleet, and you still think girls cost too much? Even the Serenese?" Garrity kept on looking wise. "I'm not kidding. I've seen a lot of men come up to retirement without a credit put away. Half pay and nothing else, all because they spent everything having a good time." "You can do without women, maybe?" I asked. "No," Garrity admitted. "I'm a normal man." "Yeah," said Gloucester, very flat. Garrity looked peeved. "Well, I am, but I'm careful, too. I figured it all out a long time back. I aim to have everything you guys look for and not go to half the trouble and expense." "What did you figure out?" "I'm going to get married." Gloucester and I just sat there, looking at each other. After a while, Gloucester finished his coffee in silence. He got up, looked at Garrity, shook his head sadly, and went out. It took me a while to finish looking Garrity over myself. When I managed to get my voice under control, I asked him what he was talking about. "I saw what happened to my old man," Garrity told me. "When he came up for retirement, he was broke. He doesn't complain, but he never has anything left out of his retirement pay. Spends his time loafing around and writing his memoirs. It was women mostly. After he lost my mother, she died when I was born, he went off to space again. Sent back enough to keep me. Spent the rest in one port or another." I didn't say anything, but it was beginning to add up. I don't know anything about psychology, but I thought there might be something like a reason in what Garrity was telling me for the way Garrity was. Somewhere he'd got the idea that his old man wasn't happy. I doubted it, because I've seen and talked to lots of old retired hands. Most of them had a good life behind them, and they were still enjoying the taste of it. But I didn't argue with Garrity about it. I've got more sense. When a man's got a pet notion, leave it alone. You won't pry him off it, and you might get him mad at you. A spaceship's too small to make enemies in. "Suppose you get married," I asked him. "So you have a place to go, and a girl in it, in one port. How about all the others? Going to take a permanent port watch instead of seeing a little fun?" "Easy," Garrity said. "I'll just get married in all of them." "All of them?" "Well, the ones I'm in most often. Terra City, Chaffanor, some other places. I'm thinking of homesteading on one line as soon as I pad on a little seniority." The notion did have a certain cold practicality about it. I didn't like it, but as far as getting away with it went, he could. Garrity went on to explain a bit more. His system seemed to have been worked out to the last detail. he'd set up 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 happy little households, spend his end-of-run leave in each, dividing up his time nice and even. All of them together wouldn't cost him what a night or 2 on the town might. To add to that, he'd pick out his wives with care. They'd all be different in a lot of ways, for the sake of variety, but they'd all be affectionate, home-loving girls, and careful with money. They'd save his credits for him, and when he retired, he could keep active and happy visiting them and his various families, which he expected to include a real lot of kids and grandchildren. "I don't believe in small families," he explained. At the time, I never thought he'd try to carry it through. I've heard wild ideas in mess rooms before, particularly halfway through a long trip. They usually fade out when a man gets his feet down on gravity again. This one didn't. But it might have worked out at that. It was just Garrity's luck that he signed on the Brooklyn. The Brooklyn carried ore from Serco to Terra, and Terran machinery back to Serco, a regular, steady run. When I bumped into Garrity in the hiring hall, he told me he'd just signed on her, and I told him I had too. Naturally, I asked him how the Garrity old age insurance system was working out. "Well," he confessed, "I'm not married yet, but I've got a likely girl here in Terra City. All I've got to do is ask her. Now, if I can line one up in Serco—" "In Serco?" I turned a little pale, I think. "Listen, Garrity, have you ever been in Serco?" "No. Why? Aren't they humanoids?" "Oh, sure." I was trying to think just how you'd describe Serco and its peculiar people. "Only different." "How are they different?" Looking at that stubborn mug of his, I knew I wasn't going to be able to explain this in a million years. It was just no use. Garrity had everything all figured out. But I took one try. "They've never been much of a mechanical culture. They buy all their stuff from outside in exchange for ore and timber. But they're one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. They've spent 1,000,000 years learning about minds and thoughts, all that philosophy sort of thing. I don't mean they aren't perfectly all right. They're human, but they know a lot. It wouldn't pay to fool around with them." Garrity laughed. "Maybe they might read my mind?" I knew it was no use. I just shrugged, bought Garrity a beer to celebrate, and we headed for the spaceport. No, the Sercoans don't read minds. At least I don't think they do, though there are times when they're that clever at adding you up that you'd think they were looking at your thoughts. Garrity didn't get caught that way. He got caught because he couldn't keep from telling the rest of us about his great idea. One of the navigators, a man named Lane, was the one who told Katha about it. Lane was in love with Katha, naturally. Everybody was. She worked in the port medical office, and she was one of the reasons why it took a high seniority card to sign on a ship for Serco. There were a lot of men who'd take an extra set of immune shots just to have Katha give it to them, and it isn't a bit easy to figure out why. She wasn't any beauty. Good-looking, sort of, but not especially so. A tallish girl, with gray eyes and a long, narrow, sensitive face. Browny red hair that always looked a little carelessly cut. As I said, nothing at all special. It was just something about her. She could have had her pick, and she picked Garrity. And only Lane broke the rules and told her. Trouble is, he told her a couple of weeks too late. It was because Lane had never thought that Katha would fall for Garrity that he hadn't told her before. But when he touched down at Serco Port and heard that Katha and Garrity had gotten married the week before, he didn't waste any more time. He called Katha up from the spaceport and told her all about the Garrity plan, and how she was only the first, but definitely not the last. Lane told me afterward what Katha had said. "I am not jealous," she had answered. "If he had wanted others when he was away, he could have done as he wished, as a man might. But he has spoken to you as a child, not a man. I do not like that." She didn't sound terribly angry. It was the way she phrased it that bothered Lane. "But he is not a bad man," she said thoughtfully to Lane. "And he is a good lover and makes a fine husband. I will not hurt him, but I think I will give him something which will teach him, if he wants to learn. And when he has learned, I will take it away again, and he may be as free as he can, as free as any of you of the outside ever are. I can't tell you what it was she did. Neither can Garrity. Hell, he didn't even know she'd done anything. He kissed her good-bye at the port gates and went on his way, and she went back to work in the port medical office. As far as any of us could see, the Garrity plan was well under way. It wasn't 6 months before I saw the thing starting off. That was when I was invited to Garrity's second wedding. It was in Terra City, and when he asked me to come down with him for a witness, I assumed it would be the girl he had been busily courting before he went to Serco. But when I walked into the marriage registry office and took a look at the girl, I got a clear, horrific idea of just what Katha had done to Garrity. He didn't think anything had been done to him. He was all smiles. He brought the girl toward me, proud and possessive, grinning all over his face. "This is Mary Collins," he told me, and I kept on looking, not saying anything. She smiled and shook hands, and I could tell by her expression that she knew exactly what I was thinking. Unfortunately, I couldn't say a word about it to Garrity. There was always the faint possibility that I might be wrong, in which case I could make a lot of trouble by saying a few words. The words were there, though, straining to get out. When he said, "Mary Collins," what I wanted to say was, "No, it isn't. It's Katha." Because it was. After I watched the girl long enough, all the way through the marriage ceremony, then down in the elevator and out into the street, I became dead certain. There was a brown mole on Katha's arm. Mary had it too. And there was a look about the eyes. Well, there could only be one Katha. What I could not understand was why Garrity didn't see it. After all, he'd been married to Katha. But when I tried to say something to him, he brushed it off. "Sure, Mary looks a little like Katha," he agreed with me. "But there are all kinds of small differences. Things a man finds out as he goes along. Look, I'm very fond of both of them. I know the difference. You're just confused by the slight resemblance." The clincher was the problem of how Katha had reached Terra City ahead of Garrity, to begin with, and whether there was still a Katha in Serco. I asked a man off a ship fresh from Serco, and he told me Katha hadn't been there for some time. No one knew where she'd gone, but she had said she'd be back. So Mary could be Katha, given a fast passenger ship. And Arnell could be Katha, too. Arnell had a mole in the right place. So did Lillian, and Ruth, and Virginia. Yes, Garrity married every one of them. 6 girls, 6 planets. It took him a while, and by the time he got as far as Ruth, he was going to a lot of trouble to arrange his shipping runs so he could make the full circuit. But every so often I'd hear from him, or run into him, and there would always be a new one. The Garrity plan was going fine, but it lacked that one ingredient he had counted on: variety. Every one of those girls was Katha. He didn't think so. He could call off the differences between them by the hour. To listen to him, if you hadn't actually seen them, you'd have believed every word he said. Each one of them gets a share of Garrity's pay, a big share from the looks of it. Each one of them keeps a nice place for Garrity, and when he comes into port, he eats and sleeps as well as any honest ground walker. And each one of them has a small fat baby boy, of whose exact age Garrity never seems to be quite sure. 2 or 3 of the kids seem extremely advanced for their ages, and they were all born fairly close together, which was enough to make Garrity as proud as a rooster. And Garrity seems to be the only one who can't tell. Thinking about it might make a man want to rush off to Serco and find a girl like Katha, and Serco is full of them. I'd like having a girl like Katha. I'd like having 6 Kathas even better. But I'm not going to. I won't drive myself batty trying to figure out how she'd be keeping me fooled. And especially why. End of Garrity's Annuities by David Mason. Read by Roger Melin.
All Were Monsters by Manly Wade Wellman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. All Were Monsters by Manly Wade Wellman. "I've watched you in the sky," I whispered, staring in shocked disbelief at the humanoid male from the little spaceship. "For 3 nights with my telescope." I gestured toward the roof where the instrument stood. "I made it myself, and I can see the rings of Saturn and Jupiter's moons. I live alone on this farm, and—" I stopped abruptly, telling myself I was quite mad to think that he could understand me. "Oh, but I can," he said instantly. In the gloom, he looked just the way you'd expect an inhabitant of another world would look, from his long, thin, snug-garmented arms and legs to his high-domed forehead. "I know how to communicate telepathically with your kind," he said. That made sense, but the rest of it didn't. "I can't believe it," I said. "The first ship from another world. Why didn't the big observatories report on your coming?" "They didn't see me," was his measured reply. "But if my crude homemade telescope picked you out—" "I didn't want them to see me," he explained patiently. "Too much attention would have been exhausting. I wanted to start quietly with you. Long before I set down on your world, I decided on you, with your telescope, and your lonely home out here away from any densely populated area. Let's go in." As I led him toward my back door, I still couldn't grasp it. He looked too patly like the popular conception of a creature from another planet. "You can't grasp it," he said. "I look too patly like the popular conception of a creature from another planet." "You can read my mind?" I gasped, forgetting that he had just informed me that he had telepathic powers. "And I can speak your language. As to my appearance, I have adopted a synthetic disguise to avoid startling you too much. If you saw and heard me as I really am, you'd refuse to believe in my existence." I opened the kitchen door for him. Inside, his snug garments shone metal bright. He had large glowing eyes, and his thin face seemed inscrutably observant and somehow very wise. Just as I closed the door behind us, he goggled upward and shrank back as though terrified. "What's that?" he gasped. "A moth," I replied. "It was drawn to the electric light." Snatching the little creature out of the air, I crushed it in my fingers and dropped it on the table. "You did that almost instinctively," he said, "and ruthlessly." "It was only a moth," I said. "That was the first time I ever saw a violent death," he told me. "I'd heard of it, but only as it happens on your world. You see, we've studied you far across space, but we didn't know you had these little living things. Moths, as you call them." Looking at him, I wondered if he really was what he claimed to be. An inhabitant of another world. "I'll convince you," He read my mind again. "And you'll help me convince others. I have thought of a way to make you believe. A scientific way. Gold-making puzzles you, doesn't it?" He seated himself at the kitchen table and drew toward him a tarnished fork. From his belt pouch he took a small object resembling a salt shaker and sprinkled dull dust on the utensil. Pouching the shaker, he produced a tiny black vial and carefully trickled liquid on the dust. He twiddled the fork briefly, then held it out. It gleamed yellow and weighed heavy in my hand. To outward appearance, at least, it was gold. "What else?" he asked. "Restoring the dead to life?" Again he produced a vial and shook a single drop of yellow liquid on the crushed body of the moth. From a tiny syringe, he blew a cloud of vapor. Finally, he turned a red glow like a miniature flashlight on the insect. Then he shrank back in his chair, for the moth had stirred and was fluttering up to the light. Again I swiftly caught and crushed it, and he relaxed. "You're afraid of your own gift of life," I said. He shook his big head. "We've studied only your civilized race. We knew of no other living things. Uncivilized, uncontrolled. Forgive me if I seem nervous." "How did you study us?" I asked. Close-mouthed, he smiled. "We use mechanisms of awareness. Without optical or auditory experience of you, we have familiarized ourselves with even your slipshod fantastic notions about other worlds. That is why I look and speak as I do, to conform with your notions. I even rigged my vehicle to resemble your mental picture of a spaceship, recognizable to your preconception. I can even achieve complete invisibility. I'll show myself only to scholars and scientists of your choosing." "What name shall I give you?" I asked. "You could not speak my real name. You may call me Provor. That sounds like the name of someone from another world, to you." "Where is your world, Provor?" I asked. "What is it like?" "It's far from your system. We'll reach a point of en rapportement which will enable you to understand its location. But it is more important that I first know about you." I sat down opposite him. "Do you intend to make war upon us?" I asked. "Have you drawn up a plan of conquest?" Shaking his head, he smiled again. "We have no such plan. We don't understand killing and conquering. But when I bring my people back, we must understand how to survive here. Our world is overcrowded, exhausted. We'll colonize this one." "But you just said," I reminded him gently, "that you didn't want to conquer us." Again he smiled. "When we come back, you won't be here. Any of you. Our observers give your race something like 2 of your decades in which to destroy yourselves." I looked at him in tight-lipped silence. It was no new idea. Most thinking people agree that we're on the doorstep of self-extermination. But Provor came out with it so facilely, like someone who knows that an apartment will be vacant for him by the 1st of the month. Only a quite insane mind. "I'm completely sane," he assured me. "You can predict the future, is that it?" "Anyone can predict the future who makes a careful scientific study of the present and the past. Your race will be gone, except for a few scattered survivors, by the time I bring back enough of my people to populate this world." He looked at me as he spoke. "Is there no hope for us, then?" I asked. Then I realized with horror that I was accepting his prediction at face value, and almost shouted at him. "This is our world. Do you hear? Ours, not yours." "Why begrudge it to me and mine after you leave it empty?" he asked. Then he started violently, staring. "What's that?" My sharp voice had summoned Skip, my bull terrier. Entering the kitchen, he stationed himself beside the stove, and he looked at Provor. "It's just my dog," I said. "He always gets excited when I raise my voice." "This isn't at all what I expected," Provor said shakily. Skip stood stiff-legged a yard from Provor and growled almost savagely. "Get him out of here," Provor pleaded. "Down, Skip," I commanded. "That's it, old fellow. Calm now." Skip sat down, his eyes still on Provor. There, he won't harm you, I said. He knows you're frightened, and that makes him foolhardy. But I tried to go invisible, Provor said. I tried to vanish completely from his consciousness. It should have worked, but he knows I'm here. Provor quivered. I stared at him amazed. I thought you had pretty thorough impressions of our world. Only of your chief activities and preoccupations. Nothing about the hideous, monstrous creatures you call dogs. Perhaps we take dogs too much for granted, I said. We should not. They're our friends. But they're so repellently alien, he protested. Not your kind at all. I stared at him. Don't you have pets and other animals on your world? My people are the only inhabitants, he explained. Once there were others, strange and terrifyingly different, so long ago that we see only their remains in our sedimentary rocks. His shoulders twitched nervously. I recalled how he had acted about the moth and began to understand the creepy strangeness which was making him quake. Are there many dogs like this one? He asked apprehensively. Almost everybody has a dog, I replied. Or a cat. What is a cat? He asked, but there was no need for me to enlighten him. Oscar strolled in after Skip, a four-footed, perambulating muff. He sat beside Skip, his green eyes on Provor. He purred like an outboard motor. I thought Provor would leap out through the window glass. A cat, he said. You keep him for what purpose? I tried to be reassuring. Just for his company and respectability. Of course, he catches mice. What are mice? As I told him, his face grew tense and sick. All are monsters, he said. Your world breeds a horrible variety of abnormal creatures. We thought you were like us, a single living species subduing a planet to your will. These other things are uncivilized. I was quite sure the word didn't mean exactly what he wanted it to mean. Skip and Oscar were civilized enough, if it came to that. I think he meant that they were uncanny, beyond those mechanisms of awareness he was accustomed to. They won't hurt you, I assured him. Watch while I feed them. You'll see how friendly they are. I took a plate of leftover pork roast from the refrigerator, and with a sharp kitchen knife I shaved off scraps. Oscar and Skip accepted the repast with a well-bred relish. What are they eating? Provor wanted to know. Meat, I said. Animal food, pork. We make our food from the elements, Provor said. Synthetics, I nodded understandingly. You'd have to, with no domestic food animals. From what animal does that food come? I described a pig, then in more colorful detail a steer. He drummed his tapering fingers on the table. Your world swarms with hideous life, he repeated. It all depends on how you look at it, I said. We're used to it. I'm not. Therefore it gives you the creeps, the way I'd feel in a room full of snakes. What are snakes? I told him. He asked more questions, and I spoke of rabbits that scampered across fields, of fish swarming in streams and lakes and oceans, of birds in the air, elephants and lions and tigers. He listened in a silence that grew even more ominous around him. Your planet is infested, he said. This is terrible. Why terrible? I asked, really wanting to know. He looked sidelong at Skip and Oscar, their sharp white teeth busy with the pork. Monsters can't be rationalized. I can't read their minds. I can't disappear from them. They are utterly new to my experience. They really are terrifying to him, I thought. Like ghosts. What are ghosts? He demanded instantly. Strange, mysterious beings that ignorant people believe in, I said. Spirits of dead creatures, of evil intelligences, lurking and spying, ready to do harm. Are they animals? Said Provor. No, I told him. Ghosts are imaginary, animals are real. Animals, he said, are evil intelligences, lurking and spying, ready to do harm. Nonsense, Provor, I tried to reassure him. Animals know us for their masters. We've won mastery over them. But your race kills and conquers, he said. Mine doesn't. That's why these creatures don't think I'm a master. And when your race destroys itself, these other races will remain here. He rose, shrinking away from Skip and Oscar. Have you a light to show me to my ship? He asked. I took a flashlight and escorted him from the house. Skip and Oscar watched us from the door in quiet unconcern. Out in the field beside his ship, Provor looked wan in the flashlight's beam. Goodbye, he said. We won't attempt to colonize this monster-thronged world. It's as you said, we would feel as you would feel among snakes. I can understand that feeling as it is registered in your mind. Then, I said, if my race ends the way you say, the world will belong to animals. Perhaps dogs will rule, or cats or mice. Home folks, anyway. Maybe they'll do better than we could ever hope to do. Since we won't come here, said Provor, would you like to know how to avoid destroying yourself? How? I cried eagerly. His smile was tight as he studied me carefully. When I tell you, it will seem simple. And how simple it seemed as he told me, just before he left. So simple, the way to stop wars and conquests and destruction. I hope it won't sound ridiculous when I pass it on to the United Nations. End of All Were Monsters by Manly Wade Wellman.